everybody. Karen Roby here with Bill Detweiler and Steve Ranger for Tech Republic and ZDNet, talking today about bringing employees back into the office and what that's going to look like, and some of the technology that we can expect to be coming here down the pike as we're working towards a new normal, whatever that may end up looking like, guys. Bill, let's start with you here on this. Talk about where you think we are right now, and in the near future, what we can expect.
Yeah, so right now it's still very limited. Most companies that I talk to, that we cover, aren't really rushing to get people, employees specifically, back in large office buildings. So here we're not talking about frontline staff, factory workers. We're talking about knowledge workers, office workers. And so there's still a lot of planning that needs to take place before companies feel comfortable bringing people back into the offices, and before employees actually feel comfortable coming back into the office. You also have to factor in things like uh, uh, mass transit. If you're in a large urban area, there are still concerns about taking subways, buses, trains into a city center to an office. In more rural areas where people drive their own cars, you might see, there may not be those concerns, but there's still a lot of factors that companies are struggling to figure out. And so a lot of them are turning to technology to help them, you know, provide a way for people to come back safely. And so you'll see companies like ServiceNow, Salesforce, even fitness companies like Fitbit, coming out with Zebra, coming out with technologies to help companies either do contact tracing, manage their response to the virus, help maintain social distancing among their employees. And companies are going to be looking over the next, if they're not looking now, which a lot are, they're really going to be starting to implement some of these as we get through the summer and into the fall. Right now it's still very much only bringing essential employees back into the office. So those are folks that maybe it's difficult for them to do their job remotely. In terms of bringing everyone back into the office, or a large portion of people back in the office, it's just still too early to tell, even 5-6 months into this.
Yeah, and I think one of the difficult things will be, managing company culture. You don't want to damage the culture when you bring people back in, because people are at different places with this. I've found, some are really eager to get back into the office. Others think, "Whoa, I don't know when I'm going to feel comfortable to go back in." So, how do you manage that, Steve, with the different attitudes and the feelings that people have right now?
Yeah, I think there's a whole bunch of stuff you're going to have to manage from in terms of all those kinds of things. I mean, if you think you're going to change the very nature of the office, so it may well be that when you return to the office, it doesn't look anything like it was when you left. So it might be trivial things. It might be you can only walk one way around the office, or your desks are slightly further apart, or it might be much more significant than that. It depends on the decisions that individual companies make. So the very fabric of the office is going to change, and inevitably that will change the culture. I guess you won't be having lots of meetings in small rooms anymore. You'll be having doing some of the basic things you might have done every day in your office, you'll be doing very differently. Now, in some respects, we've all been working from home for the last few months, so it might not be too strange to make those changes, because we've kind of forgotten what it was like before. But yeah, there's a whole bunch of stuff that's going on, and as Bill says, there's the broader thing as well, which is how do you get to the office? Where do you have your lunch? How do you even get your lunch? All that kind of stuff is kind of stuff that's giving people a lot of big problems to figure out. I think so far technology has been quite a small part of that back to work problem. I think it will become bigger as well. I think there are lots of little different things that people are trying out. So I've seen apps for augmented reality apps for phones, where you can kind of hold up your phone, it'll tell you how far people are away from you. Now, that's an app that wasn't particularly useful until now, but now working out if someone's 2 meters away from you or a meter away or whatever actually becomes quite handy. So those technologies that maybe didn't have a kind of a useful niche before will find one. And certainly from the stories we've been writing over the last few weeks, from talking to the reporters who've been writing them, there's wearable technologies are coming back. So you might have a wristband on, and if you get too close to one of your co-workers, it might beep, or it might kind of remind you, actually, you know what, you want to step back now. And so there might be some technologies that can help us to reinforce new habits, because creating new habits is always hard. And if you can get some sort of technologies that just give you that kind of little extra push, that sort of thing might be quite handy.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that obviously has to be talked about as well, we've touched on this before, what this will look like is, in terms of privacy, what type of concerns are employees going to have if they feel like they're being tracked, to a certain extent. What do y'all think about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a concern. I got a pitch yesterday from a PR company about an app that basically companies could put on frontline workers' phones, and then they could use the app to track the geographic location of those workers and who they've come into contact with, people, areas where they may have been, and then they can use that to sort of shape their COVID response and do contact tracing, and find out, separate people that might be infected, or if they get tested and test positive, being able to sort of quickly isolate that person or determine who they come into contact with. So I think there are a lot of concerns. I mean, we've seen it not just with corporate apps. We've seen it with the governments that have tried to do this. We've seen it with the Apple and the Google program. There's been a lot of resistance depending on what the kind of what the social norms are in that country, what the expectations are when it comes to data privacy. So I think you're definitely going to get some pushback. Now, when it comes to sort of corporate owned equipment, it's sometimes a little easier. People give up a little more privacy. Let's say if you have a corporate car and you're a frontline worker, it may already have GPS tracking built into it. So it might not be that big a deal for them to say, okay, well, we're going to put this on your phone. And obviously, if you're a knowledge worker and you're sitting at home and working at home, you probably don't need that because you're not going anywhere, but there's going to be some concerns there. So there are ways, though, to do this. I think, like Steve mentioned, with so fitness trackers, there are ways to do this that may not be as invasive as, say, complete sort of GPS tracking. So, there are technologies. A good example of this was a technology that came out of Germany, that would help people know when a lunchroom, it was some experimental technology that would help people in an office know when a lunchroom is full. Now, in Europe, because of GDPR and just norms around data privacy and concerns that people have, cameras are not really allowed without explicit consent. So the technology used, I believe it was just infrared sensors to detect body heat as people moved through an area. So I think there are answers that technology can provide here that may lessen the privacy concerns people have, but it's something companies have to consider.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think your point about the government contact tracing apps is really good. Some of those have been reasonably well received. Some of them have not been received well at all, and some of them just haven't worked, right? And I think matching the right technology to the right situation, I think, is really important. So I think people are willing to give up a little bit of privacy right now if it means that they can be safer. I think longer term, people will look harder at these things and say, well, do you really need to do that? Do you really need to know that thing about me to do these things? So I think you'll have I think there's a certain amount of goodwill out there right now and willingness for people to compromise a little bit on privacy. But I wonder how long that will last. And I think companies have to be quite careful about the strategies and the techniques they use, because that can kind of like come back at a later date.
Yeah, okay. And when you talk about the desire to bring people back to the office, there's so many things to consider. Liability being one of those, and can we get the materials we need to make the office, especially with so many tech companies having an open floor plan? I know we do at our office. Bill, what do you think about that?
Yeah, it is a challenge right now, and I think it'll continue to be a challenge as offices around the world look at this. You mentioned our office, and we have an open floor plan. We have sit-stand desks that reporters sit at, and I think people are, they're less than 6 feet apart. The desks themselves are maybe 6 feet wide. There are no partitions between them. It's a large, open newsroom type environment, and that's clearly not optimal right now. And so in order for us to come back into the office, we'd have to make either we'd have to make adjustments to that, either move the desks further apart, which may or may not be possible given your situation. You might have to install barriers between the desks. Again, that's an added expense. That's not necessarily practical in all situations. You might have to stagger when people come back into the office. So have half the staff come back in the office, or have so that every other desk is populated. But then again, even while you're sitting at the desk, are you facing someone? Are you behind them? And then what's the purpose of bringing half the staff back into the office? You still can't have the large all company meeting. Yes, you can have a face-to-face meeting, but it really makes you think, and companies are evaluating, well, what's the purpose of actually doing this? Because like you said, Karen, there are liability issues when it comes to bringing people back together, whether it's for a large event or it's just a normal office environment. Companies, I think, are evaluating whether or not they bear some responsibility. If someone comes back, they get sick, what does that do? Even if they're, even if it's not a liability issue, it's a worker health issue. It's a safety issue. So even if you're not worried about getting sued or having some type of fine imposed by a regulatory agency, a government agency, if you're just concerned about the health of your workers and about, people being able to work, or worried about their health, it's something companies are really having to struggle with. And I don't see that having a quick and easy solution. That's the thing, is I think we've been at this several months, but I think it's going to take a few months longer before companies are able to decide. And, as we've talked about previously, there are some companies that are saying, if you want to work from home from now and for the foreseeable future, forever, that's fine too.
Yeah, and if we're doing that, which we will be, because that is just where we are. Like you said, there's no quick and easy answer to this. Do we have the right tools at home? Conferencing like this, do we really have the right tools and technology right now to make this more of a long-term thing? What do you think, Steve?
I think one of the things that's really interesting is that all this, upheaval and working from home has really kind of proved to us that the tools aren't quite there right now. There are lots of things you can do, and there are lots of things you can't do. I think something like video conferencing has obviously become a real key tool for business and for pretty much for everyone over the last few months. But it's still not there, right? It's still, it could still be better. If you look at some of the other technologies that we were promised would really help out in a situation like this, like virtual reality or something, so we could all put on a headset and be in the same room and have that meeting, but without the risk of kind of like exposing ourselves to any risks. That didn't work either. Very few people using virtual reality. No one's, part of that is no one's got the headsets, but equally the technology is just not there right now. And there are all sorts of things like that. I would say collaboration tools that people have been trying to get them right for decades, in terms of team working and making project work and all that kind of stuff. The reason there are so many different tools out there is none of them really work perfectly. So if you think of all that kind of stuff, these are like the fundamental things that humans find very easy to do: to work together, to talk together, to communicate, to share ideas. Those really core technologies that still need work, right? So in maybe if we're still going to be doing, I think it's highly likely that as Bill says, some companies are saying, you can work remotely for as long as you like. I think there's still going to be a significant chunk of certainly that knowledge worker kind of population that is going to be working remotely, is going to be working from home. Maybe not every day, but for a significant chunk of the week, for a significant time to come. And that means that those tools around collaboration and communication, they really need to get better a lot quicker, because they are kind of holding us all back. So I think that's the kind of one of the big things I think will change over the next year or so, is that hopefully those tools will get better, so that we are that friction that we have right now, setting up a video call or trying to share a document or talk about an idea, that friction kind of goes away a bit, because it's still, frankly, there's still quite a lot of it.
Yeah.
The other thing, I'll add one thing to that too, is that because Steve is exactly right, the tools aren't very good. And what's also in flux right now is just the culture. So you think about in an office environment or in any environment where multiple people come together to work in sort of in the same physical space, there is you give up some of your privacy when you do that, right? Like I have an glass walls on my office, and so when I'm in there and I'm sitting there, there's not much privacy. Sure, you can go to another room to have a private conversation. You can go into a meeting room to have a meeting with a large group of people, but for the most part, anyone in the office walks by can see exactly what I'm doing. They can overhear what I'm saying. They can, so there's that expectation that you're giving that up, and you're doing it for a good reason. It's okay. But now, since everyone's working from home, I'm filming this from my home. I only turn the camera on when we're filming like this, or when I'm doing a video call, or when I'm recording. And so again, I'm allowing other people into my private space. It's not a public space. And so I think culture is going to have to change in some ways to facilitate those kind of interactions that we have in the hallways, standing next to someone's desk, in the lunchroom, in a meeting room, so that like Steve said, the tools can facilitate those meetings in a way that isn't uncomfortable for people. Like, I don't know that I would want the same level of exposure in my private house, even if it's just, in a multi-purpose room. Like, unless you have an office that's built in your house specifically, and that's where the work happens and nothing else happens there, then sure, maybe you feel like you could have a camera on 8 hours a day, so that, oh, you're working away and you're typing and someone pops in on a window on your screen. It's like, hey, let's chat about this. That's cool. But if the area you're working in is also a living room, a bedroom, you have family members that are there, they're going to walk behind you. There's a lot of cultural issues around the kind of, around working from home that still have to be worked out.
Yeah, it can be awkward at best, when we're in our homes, and that's just that's what we have to work around. Well, one thing is sure, there's no blueprint for this for bringing folks back to the office, and we're certainly getting together as much information as we can, and videos and articles for everyone, of course, up on ZDNet and Tech Republic, to help companies work through this as we move through this time, which has been really unprecedented and certainly difficult, but trying to do it all together. So guys, thanks for being here with me today. And we hope all of you will check out all the information we have there at ZDNet and Tech Republic. And we appreciate you watching.